Welcome to Live from Size Lounge, weekly conversations with alumni of Iowa State University. At the ISU Alumni Association, we strive to facilitate the lifetime connection of Cyclones everywhere, communicating, connecting, and celebrating Cyclone pride. This series is made possible thanks to the more than 43,000 members of the Alumni Association. If you are interested in staying connected to the university and receiving all the benefits and services of being a member, visit isualum.org to learn more.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome into Live from Size Lounge. My name is Matt Van Winkle with the Iowa State University Alumni Association. Thanks to everyone tuning in here to our live broadcast and watching or listening to the replay of this on Facebook, YouTube, or our podcast. We are also actually streaming on our LinkedIn page, so if you're watching on LinkedIn, hello to you. This is a new thing we're trying out this week, streaming over to our LinkedIn page. So if you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, head over to our LinkedIn page and give us a follow there as well. Last week was actually our 20th interview since we began doing these live broadcasts here on social media, and these actually began over on our Instagram page back in May, and thanks to our incredible member support, we've been able to keep this series going and grow it to what you see here today. It's a great way for us to share the amazing stories of Cyclones everywhere, so be sure to let us know where you're tuning in from, and also share the name of an Iowa State alum who you think would be a good person for us to interview here on Live from Size Lounge. Well, today we're going to be joined by Greg Smith. Greg is a 1991 graduate from Iowa State with a degree in occupational safety. He also received his master's in public administration here in 2010. Greg was appointed the fire chief for the city of Cedar Rapids Fire Department, where he has served since 1994. When the derecho storm passed through Iowa in August, heavily impacting Cedar Rapids and the surrounding areas, Greg was named incident commander for the city's disaster response. He leads the accredited department of 148 full-time employees operating from 9 stations. Greg is also a member of the Iowa State University Alumni Association's Board of Directors, and it's my pleasure to welcome today Greg Smith. Hey, Greg, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm happy to be here.
Doing really well, Greg. And we saw each other a couple weeks back, but how are things going out in Cedar Rapids with the fire department?
Going pretty well overall. We're still obviously during these COVID challenged times, navigating that, and then navigating the post-derecho response. Post-derecho, our run volume has kind of returned back to I'll call kind of normal business per se. But yeah, it's going well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Greg, a lot I want to get to with you, but let's go back to when you were a student here. Obviously, I mentioned you graduated a little bit ago, but you got your degree here in occupational safety. And was your goal when you decided to study occupational safety to become a firefighter, or what was your objective when you chose that as your major?
No, it wasn't. The short answer is no. The longer answer is I started out, as I suspect a lot of students have in history, of Iowa State, started out in engineering, and then my sophomore year, I switched it to occupational safety, and I was really just looking for something that piqued my interest, and it was interesting. I'd kind of had an interest in hazardous materials response, the fire response and that type of stuff, and so I switched to occupational safety. But my dad was actually a volunteer firefighter growing up in a small town in north central Iowa. And I figured I would probably graduate from college and I would work somewhere and I'd live in a smaller community or a suburban community and join a volunteer fire department, kind of do what he had done. And as I went through and went along, I graduated, as you mentioned, in 1991 with a degree in occupational safety. Worked for a company by that time called National Byproducts. They've since been sold several, I think at least once, and worked as a safety director for that company and worked as an industrial hygienist on asbestos abatement projects. And that was about 4 years or so before I got hired onto the fire department. And I actually got my interest in a career firefighter in the years after I graduated from Iowa State, and I joined the Ankeny volunteer fire department when I worked in the Des Moines area, and then just started talking to people who were career firefighters and decided that was something that I wanted to apply for and see where it took me, and it brought me to Cedar Rapids.
Well, you've been with the Cedar Rapids Fire Department for nearly 30 years, and When people hear about Cedar Rapids, it's a city that's really seen its fair share of some pretty serious natural disasters. And in that time, some devastating floods in 2008, 2016 most recently. So what were some of those experiences like for you as the on-scene incident commander and really involved with that response?
Yeah, so I'd start off with, you mentioned the 2008 floods, and my career with the fire department has, I've come up through the ranks. I started as a firefighter in 1994, promoted to captain in 1999, which meant I led a crew of 2 to 3 people on either a ladder truck, an engine, or a rescue truck. And I was a captain for about 10 years, then promoted to battalion chief, and worked on shift as a shift commander for a couple of years, and then assistant chief, and then now chief for the last year and a half or so. And the 2008 floods was very, very interesting. It was a once in a career event, and ironically now I've had probably 4 once in a career events since then. So I guess I can't call them once in a career anymore. But I was the on-scene commander for the boat rescues during the 2008 floods, during the height of the flooding. So I served that shift. I was scheduled to be on shift that Thursday where the waters did crest. And I was on the corner, or I was on the intersection of First Avenue and the Cedar River, which the Cedar River at that point was out of its banks and ended up to be on about 10th Street on the west side of the river. And I oversaw the boat rescues, and I think at one point during the height of it, we had 16 or 17 rescue boats on the river, and we oversaw during that time period about 423 boat rescues was the estimated number of rescues that we did during that time period, and I was probably the on-scene commander for right around 300 of them, I would speculate. It was obviously very chaotic and whatnot. We were very fortunate that we got through the floods of 2008 with no loss of life in the city of Cedar Rapids, and some minor injuries to either civilians or fire department or other response personnel. So really just an intense 25 or 26 hour time period where I was on the streets at that time, and kind of working the 24 or 48 hours on, 24 off for a time period there for a while with the boat rescues, and then kind of the time period after where we kept our numbers up for a response throughout the city.
How do you, as a firefighter, prepare for a flood or a rescue mission like that where you're going in on boats and pulling people out of homes? Like, how do you prepare or train for something like that?
Well, we really are an all hazards department, as many fire departments are these days. Obviously, we're called a fire department, but we do medical response, we do confined space, trench rescue, high and low angle rope rescue, and water rescue with the Cedar River coming through the city, and a couple of other streams and creeks that come through that flood every once in a while. And so we do have a contingent of boats, and it's a combination of things. We have swift water trained people, and so swift water is more that flash flooding type of thing. The Cedar River overflowing was something that was obviously unheard of by that point, and so 32 and a half feet, I think, or 32 and a quarter feet was the crest, and prior to that, I think 20 feet had been the maximum that the Cedar River had ever reached at least in recorded history. And so it's just maintaining diligence with training with the crews, incident command system, and how we operate from an incident commander, incident manager on through the rescue situation. And we do have a low head dam in the city that we've done some training in and around, I shouldn't say in, but around the low head dam for rescue of people. But we really didn't foresee the level and the devastation of flooding that we had. And so it was really just people going into that response mode. And so we're trained to, really take a situation where you can really only have maybe 20 to 30% of the information you need to make an educated decision or a response decision, and make that decision and go through with that. So we had people navigating streets on boats where the street signs were covered, and it was just by familiarity with the area, and then finding the right house and bringing the people out of the house.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, you were also the incident commander for the city's disaster response for that derecho storm that impacted so many people in Iowa, but most seriously in Cedar Rapids and that area that you're in and the surrounding communities. Walk us through what these past few months have been like, not only for you as a first responder, but for the people living in that area as well.
Sure. August 10th started out like most summer days. It was your typical August day, and I knew that we were going to be getting some storms, potentially severe storms around noon that day. And interestingly enough, both my daughters attend Iowa State currently, and I had texted or called my oldest daughter just on something completely unrelated, and she called me back a short time later and discussed about how bad the storm was moving through Ames, and we need to be prepared because I knew it was heading this way. So I knew it was going to be a pretty severe storm. Obviously, didn't know the level of devastation. And so the first part, when the storm hit, it was, evident that it was a severe and nasty thunderstorm. And then, after your first 15, 30 seconds, 90 seconds, whatever, when the wind's not dying down like it typically does after a strong front moves through and becomes a typical thunderstorm, quickly realize the level of devastation. So our crews actually, from the moment the storm hit the edge of the city, we had every crew out responding during the 40 to 45 minutes that we had the high level sustained winds. Our police department was out in the same same frame doing what they needed to do for welfare checks, and you could see on those videos the level of the tree damage. And really it was we had crews trying to figure out how to get to different places, and our public works department quickly put in a plan that they started. They got the snow plows actually on their rigs and started doing enacted their snowplow response, quite honestly, or snowstorm response, so that they could clear the roadways for emergency response and then start to do debris management. But we immediately called back people because of the level of devastation and the number of calls that we were getting, and immediately called crews back. And we heard from a number of people, of our firefighters, that said, I'll be there as soon as I can. I can't get out of my driveway. I can't get down the street, whatever. And so we knew how devastating that was, just from hearing that. It wasn't an isolated part of town. It was the entire 73, 75 square miles of the city and surrounding area that was devastated. And we didn't clear the calls from the storm until somewhere around 12:30 that morning, just from the sheer number that we had of either rescues, fires, lines down, gas leaks, that type of stuff. And so our assistant chief went to our dispatch center and prioritized our responses to obviously the higher level of life safety, and then reduced the number of apparatus to each response unless we either had a working fire or a situation that warranted more than one apparatus. So it was just an interesting time period during the storm.
That storm was so interesting because, it did move through the Midwest. When you think about the crop damage, how much damage it did in terms of, how much crop was damaged through a widespread area. You would typically, when you see like a tornado, it's a small stretch. But also when you think about these residential areas, some of these older cities, when you think about like Des Moines, some of these really closer to downtown, and when I think of Cedar Rapids, some of these big trees in the city. So that must have been the biggest issue, was all that tree debris. And you see some of these images now of when they did that limb removal, and there's just mounds and piles of debris that's piled up. I think one of the coolest things, though, that I saw, it was just how people came together and helped each other out in that storm. And as a first responder, I'm sure that's something that you were quite aware of and saw firsthand as well, right?
Absolutely. And to first speak to your first point is just, the number of 150-year-old trees, and obviously the size of those. And, right. We were without power for, I know particularly my house, I was without power for 8.5 days. And so, that was just hit and miss throughout the city. Much of the 97% of Lynn County was without power post-storm. And, it was several days to a couple weeks before power was back, before internet service was back, and all that type of stuff. And a lot of that was those trees coming down entangled in the power lines, which hampered some of the response just because of having power lines wrapped in there and couldn't clear a street or something to that effect. But yeah, to your point of people helping people, that's the Midwest. It's just so heartwarming. And whether it was the 2008 floods, whether it was the 2016 floods, whether it was, the COVID response and people needing mental health counseling and reaching out to neighbors and loved ones to the derecho, we just have a great Midwestern and Iowa work ethic and care for our neighbors. And the one thing that I heard from a number of people was that as soon as the storm passed and the sun came back out, all you could hear was chainsaws running, and people were, got out to their garages or their sheds, got their chainsaw, they were clearing their debris, they were reaching out to their neighbors and clearing debris, and just neighbors helping neighbors, people doing welfare checks on each other. And then, they would call us, obviously, if they needed a specific welfare check or whatnot. But we had reports of people, going to their, maybe an elderly couple next door and just making sure that they had what they needed, and the generators running and sharing of power and stuff like that. So just a great response of people, like you said, people helping people, and which made our jobs obviously infinitely easier, even though it was a difficult time period. And our run volume, we set a record on that August 10th, and we didn't come back down to normal for about 3 or so weeks with that. And so we obviously had a lot of runs helping a lot of people, but really it was the neighbors helping neighbors. It was the churches and other not-for-profit groups that just started, I'd say kind of organically, just saying, hey, people need to be fed. We're going to start serving meals. The grocery stores in town started serving meals, and just kind of that void where somebody needed something quickly, got that spun up before the maybe national not-for-profits or the bigger not-for-profits could get in and get established with that.
How much of a challenge was it when, like the phone lines were down and the internet was down and throughout widespread parts of the community, and people weren't able to get a hold of 911 operator? How difficult was that for you guys to not only to communicate with each other, but to be able to get feedback and hearing where there's issues in the community from people living there?
It was, yeah. I mean, two things is, one, fortunately, I would say it was about 7 or 8 years ago, Lynn County put in a new public safety communications system, and that worked flawlessly. We had our radio communications that were never compromised during the storm, nor the response after the storm. But with power being out, with the cell phone towers having some battery backup, and then once that depleted, and then the internet service being intermittent, we were on generators here at our fire stations and whatnot. But we had limited internet access on the cell phones. If you were lucky enough to get a call out, maybe you can talk to somebody for a few seconds. I had a lot of times where I could get a call out, and then all of a sudden the call got dropped. And so it was very much a challenge. And I know I spent that first couple of days, sometimes I would try to call our emergency management coordinator with the county here, and it'd be just like, forget it, I'm driving out to their building because I can't get a hold of them. And if I do, I can't talk long enough to really work through that situation. But we do have an instant command post here at our central fire station. And so all of the directors with the city, we had council members and our city manager in and out through that. And so it was difficult because in times of COVID, we were still trying to be responsible with that, make sure that we wore our face masks, make sure that we social distance when we could. But, we kind of had to walk that fine line of response to the derecho and maintaining good COVID protocols. But the instant command post that we have here was invaluable because we just needed face-to-face communication because it was hard to do that through the phone lines. But we quickly started putting out written messages, and then we would give that to our firefighters, to our police officers, to the grocery stores and gas stations that were able to open up, and we would just have reams of printed flyers of here's where you could go for food, here's where you go for sheltering, here's the latest news that we have, and we would put those out every day. But it was really going back to pre-internet, pre-cell phone type of communications with the public.
Interesting. That's really interesting perspective. Thanks for sharing that with us, Greg. And
Absolutely.
you're also a member of our board of directors here at the Iowa State University Alumni Association. Tell us about why you decided to kind of serve the university in this way.
Well, I'll kind of go back to, starting out in the fire service and stuff like that. And I served Ankeny Fire Department for about a year and a half as a volunteer before I got hired on in Cedar Rapids. I worked part-time for Kirkwood Community College and, doing hazmat response or hazmat chemical spill response classes, confined space classes. I served on Marion Fire Department for, I believe it was about 7 years. I served on the state of Iowa incident management team for about 10 years. And you're wondering, okay, yeah, I didn't ask you those questions, but that really is what led me to kind of Iowa State and the board of directors. Was I was really looking for, I had spent probably 15 to 20 years post-college of just fire service response related activities, either as a career or in my volunteer time. I did do some coaching with my kids, for about 12 or 13 years between softball and basketball and all those types of sports as kids grew up and stuff like that. But I was really itching to do something outside of the emergency response arena. And my love for Iowa State, I've followed, Iowa State athletics since I graduated, and very passionate athletics fan. But I really was like, what else can I do besides the emergency response stuff? I wanted to be more well-rounded. And I really just kind of kept coming back to how can I help serve Iowa State, and so I applied for the board of directors, and I think it was year 2 after I applied that I got selected, and it was really just again, to be involved, giving back to the university that I love so much, and being closer to that. And one of the fantastic things that has happened to me, I feel a little bit guilty, is sometimes I feel like the growth that I have received from, the friends and fellow board members, and some of the things that I learned through there, I'm almost learning more than sometimes I think I'm giving back to the board of directors. And it's a really, really neat process. And I think it's mutually beneficial. I wanted to serve the Alumni Association and use this board of directors as really to serve Iowa State University and help be a voice and a champion for that. And it's kind of one of those things. When you give, sometimes you receive back tenfold, and I really have. And so, but that's what got me interested in it, is just wanting to do something outside that arena. And again, my love for the university and just really wanting to promote Iowa State and help it be the best that it can be.
Well, you and your wife, Kim, are also life members of the Alumni Association. And you mentioned earlier that your daughters are both students here at Iowa State. And we appreciate you keeping that cyclone spirit alive all the way out in Cedar Rapids and Hawkeye country. So, but Craig, what is it about being a member that you enjoy living out in that Cedar Rapids area?
The best thing that I can just say about it, part of it is, whether you're an Alumni Association member or not, is, the whole cyclone's everywhere. It's amazing how relatable you are. And when you see somebody wearing cyclone gear, or you see Iowa State license plates, it's kind of like, it's like a kindred spirit. It's like, oh, they're one, that person's one of us. We come from the same family, the same group. And it's just, it's a university that just, it's very personable. And I can remember, whether it's going to a bowl game, whether it's going to a basketball game, whether it's going out to eat. And I've worn my Iowa State gear loud and proud. And I've been in New York City and heard from, down the street, go Cyclones, or been on the subways and hear go Cyclones, or, walking through an airport, go Cyclones. And so it's just that family atmosphere. And really, it's just also, what does Iowa State represent? And there's so many positive things that the university represents and has represented from its beginning. And just very proud to have, graduated from there. I'm very fortunate that my spouse is from there, so I don't have to have that divided household or anything like that. You talk about Hawkeye country. I joked that in 1994 that I was dropped behind enemy lines here in eastern Iowa to infiltrate and bring the Cyclones to eastern Iowa. But Lynn County with Collins and with a lot of other ag industry here in Cedar Rapids, there are a lot of Iowa State alumni, and it's really become apparent, and I just really enjoy that, and I'm proud to have a daughter that will be graduating here in May, and another one that's in the middle of her career, and just enjoy the university and what it's given us for our life, and just real proud to be an alumni.
Well, Iowa State graduates living in the state of Iowa have surpassed the team out east, as they call it, right?
Yes.
Is that what we say?
Yeah.
Well, Greg, Iowa State University graduates are using their degrees to make their communities, Iowa, and the world a better place. How do you feel you've been able to use your education from Iowa State to make an impact in the work that you do?
Well, I think it's kind of twofold. One would be my undergrad, in occupational safety. I with the fire department, my occupational safety degree gave me an understanding, either through some of the management classes that was part of that degree, or the technical understanding and knowledge, of going through the chemistry classes or the safety classes and that type of stuff, and just a better understanding of that aspect of it, and being able to fold that into my experience and my training and knowledge as a firefighter, kind of gave me an advantage, and I could put focus on that and better understanding to deliver better service. Likewise, I mentioned my teaching at Kirkwood Community College and taught a lot of industry. It was the non-credit side, a lot of industry on chemical spill response. So I could draw on, again, the chemistry. I could draw on the safety, my safety knowledge from my undergrad degree. And then when I got my public administration degree, just being able to translate that into a better understanding of, how government works. I mean, obviously I'm in municipal government, but whether it's state, and I work with the state of Iowa with urban search and rescue grant that we receive in that program, which comes from a federal grant. So just the understanding of, the history of public administration, current public administration, how maybe public administration research works, and bringing that knowledge into my role as through my battalion chief, assistant chief, and now fire chief ranks, and just being able to interact with other city directors, other levels of government, and bring that knowledge to make Cedar Rapids Fire Department a better place and improve our service delivery ultimately to the citizens of Cedar Rapids.
Excellent. Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us live from Size Lounge today. It was really fascinating to hear your perspective working in Cedar Rapids for the fire department for these almost 30 years. And again, thanks for your service here as a board member for the Alumni Association as well.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed the conversation, and go Cyclones.
Go Cyclones. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you again next time here live from Size Lounge. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your day. Go Cyclones.